Welcome, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty fundamental in small animal practice, advising owners on spaying and castration.
Right. They're routine procedures, sure, but the advice behind them,
Yeah,
that deserves some real thought.
exactly. We perform them all the time, but are we always having the most comprehensive conversations? We're going to unpack the factors using some key material today.
Yeah, the goal is really to equip you, our listeners, with a nuanced view, going beyond just the standard pros and cons lists to really tailor that advice.
Absolutely, because it's all about informed consent, isn't it? And that starts right from the initial physical exam.
More than just ticking boxes. You're looking for anesthetic risks, obviously, but also specifically, are both testicles down in males? That's crucial.
We'll definitely circle back to why that's so important.
And making sure females aren't actually in heat, because, well, that changes the surgery quite a bit.
Okay, so let's dive in. The big question first. Why do we actually recommend neutering? What are the core reasons we present?
Well, the number one reason, and it has huge societal implications, is preventing unwanted litters. Simple as that.
Still a major issue, animal overpopulation.
It really is. And you'll find most animal charities heavily promote neutering for this very reason. Think about shelter capacity, euthanasia rates.
Yeah.
It's significant.
That's a powerful point, the community aspect. But for individual owners, there are often more immediate behavioral benefits they're hoping for, right?
Oh, definitely. Those hormone-driven behaviors. Think about a bitch in season the mess, the escaping.
The sheer determination sometimes.
Exactly. Or a queen calling nonstop, driving everyone crazy, losing weight, attracting every tomcat from miles around. Neutering deals with those reproductive behaviors very effectively.
And what about the classic male behaviors? Marking territory, roaming, aggression?
Castration certainly helps reduce those. The urge to mark, the drive to roam looking for mates, and testosterone-fueled aggression often decrease significantly.
But it's not a guaranteed fix for all aggression or even those specific behaviors.
No, and that's critical for managing owner expectations. It reduces the hormonal drive, but if a behavior is learned, or related to anxiety, or just part of the dog's innate temperament, castration might not touch it, or not completely.
So we need to be clear, neutering targets hormone-linked behaviors primarily.
Precisely. Especially in cats and female dogs, don't expect major shifts in inherited or learned traits. For male dogs, yes, it can help with certain issues, but it's rarely the whole solution. You often need behavioral modification techniques alongside it.
Good clarification. Okay, let's shift to the medical side. What are the big health advantages, the prophylactic benefits?
For females, spaying is huge. It virtually eliminates the risk of pyometra, that nasty, potentially fatal uterine infection.
A major lifesaver, potentially.
Absolutely. And it stops false pregnancies. Plus, and this is a big one for dogs, spaying before the second heat drastically cuts the lifetime risk of mammary tumors.
That's a really compelling argument for early spaying in bitches.
It is a significant health advantage you need to communicate.
And for the males, what are the key preventative health benefits?
Well, castration obviously eliminates the risk of testicular cancer entirely. That's number one.
Okay.
It also significantly reduces the incidence of common prostatic diseases in dogs, like benign prostatic hyperplasia. And in cats, it cuts down on fighting, which means fewer bite abscesses and less risk of transmitting diseases like FIV.
Right, those fight wounds can be nasty.
And back to that point about descended testicles, if a dog is cryptorchid, meaning one or both haven't dropped,
Yes.
it's essential to remove both surgically. The retained testicle has a much higher risk of becoming cancerous. That's non-negotiable advice.
Understood. That's a critical piece of clinical practice. And neutering isn't just preventative. Sometimes it's part of the treatment plan.
Definitely. It's the primary treatment for diseases of the ovaries or testicles themselves, like tumors, and for pyometra, of course.
Makes sense.
But it's also used alongside other treatments for conditions influenced by sex hormones. Things like certain mammary gland diseases, some vaginal tumors, perineal hernias in male dogs, prostatic issues, even those perianal adenomas.
And even diabetes sometimes, in bitches.
Yes, because progesterone can interfere with insulin regulation, so staying can sometimes help stabilize diabetic bitches. It has a surprisingly broad therapeutic reach.
Interesting. And one more reason, preventing the spread of genetic diseases.
Right. Responsible breeders will often neuter animals identified as carriers of serious inherited conditions to stop those genes being passed on. It's part of ethical breeding practice.
Okay, so we've built a strong case for neutering, but we absolutely have to cover the other side of the coin, the disadvantages, the potential complications.
Absolutely essential for informed consent. The first, most obvious one, It's irreversible. Once neutered, that animal cannot reproduce. Period.
Owners need to be 100% clear on that. And
Yeah.
what about physical changes, like coat changes?
Yes, that can happen. Some dogs, both males and females, might develop or keep a softer, more puppy-like coat. It's not usually a health issue, but owners notice.
And color point cats.
Good point. Breeds like Siamese, Burmans. The hair that goes back over the surgical clip might be significantly darker. It's due to temperature effects on pigment. Worth mentioning.
Good detail. Then, of course, there are the standard surgical risks.
Always. Wound infection, bleeding hemorrhage, and anesthetic complications. These exist with any surgery.
And is the risk of bleeding higher at certain times?
Yes, definitely doing estrus in females. Estrogen increases the blood supply and fragility of the reproductive tract and can even affect clotting slightly. Surgery is technically more challenging and riskier then.
Something to consider regarding timing, which we'll get to, and breed-specific risks.
You should always consider if you're dealing with a breed prone to clotting issues, like von Willebrand's and Dobermans, for instance. Preoperative screening might be wise.
Oh, okay. Now, a specific complication we hear about. Urinary incontinence in spayed bitches.
Yes, unfortunately that is a known risk. Spayed females are significantly more likely, maybe 8 times more likely to develop urethral sphincter mechanism incompetence.
8 times, wow.
It seems the risk might be higher if the spay happens before their first season, though the evidence is complex. It can mean lifelong medication or sometimes even surgery to manage. It's a major quality of life concern for owners.
A really important one to discuss beforehand. What about weight gain? That's almost universally mentioned.
It's definitely a common sequel. Certain breeds seem more prone. Labs, Goldens, Spaniels, Collies. But really, many neutered dogs and cats tend to gain weight more easily.
Especially cats just left with a full bowl all day.
Exactly. Ad-lib feeding makes it worse.
Yeah.
And that obesity brings its own risks, diabetes, especially in cats, hepatic lipidosis. So post-op weight management is absolutely crucial. Diet, exercise, it needs attention.
Got it. Any other maybe less common potential issues? Like infantile genitalia.
Right. In some females spayed very young, the vulva might remain quite small or juvenile. This isn't usually a problem in itself, but it can predispose them to vulval fold dermatitis skin irritation in the folds.
And obesity or incontinence could make that worse.
They certainly can, yes. Creates a damp environment.
And I've heard owners mention lethargy in some male dogs after castration.
It's anecdotal sometimes, but yes, some owners report that their male dog, especially if he was already quite placid, seems a bit less energetic after castration. Not a universal thing, but worth noting if an owner raises it.
Finally, surgical completeness. What happens if tissue gets left behind?
Yeah, that's a potential surgical complication. If even a small piece of ovarian tissue remains after a spay.
The female can still cycle.
Exactly, she'll show signs of heat again. It's called ovarian remnant syndrome. And if the uterus isn't fully removed, you can potentially get a stump pyometra later on. So surgical technique is paramount.
Right. Okay, that covers the potential downsides. Let's move on to timing. This seems to be where opinions diverge a bit, especially for dogs.
For cats, it's simpler. General agreement is around 5-6 months before puberty hits. It's considered safe, effective, no major downsides identified with that timing.
But dogs are different.
Dogs are more debated, yes. There are strong arguments on both sides for prepubertal versus postpubertal neutering.
What's the case for prepubertal, say, before the first heat in females?
Proponents point to potentially easier surgery, maybe faster recovery in very young animals, and crucially, that maximal reduction in mammary tumor risk if done before the first or even second heat.
And the argument for waiting until after puberty.
Some evidence suggests waiting might reduce the risk of urinary incontinence later on. There's also ongoing research and debate about potential effects on orthopedic development in some larger breeds if neutered very early, though that's still quite complex and breed-specific.
So it really is a case-by-case discussion for dogs.
I think it has to be. You need to weigh the breed, the individual animal, the owner's lifestyle and concerns, and discuss the known risks and benefits of different timings. There's no single best age for every dog.
But one thing there is consensus on.
Yes, there's absolutely no proven health benefit to letting a bitch or queen have a litter before spaying. That's largely a myth.
Good to state that clearly. So if a bitch isn't spayed early, when is the ideal time surgically?
Ideally, mid-oestrus. That's the quiet period between cycles. Assuming a typical 6-month cycle, that's usually around 3 months after his last heat ended. Hormonal levels are lowest then, minimizing surgical risks like bleeding.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's touch on non-surgical options chemical control. When might these be considered?
Sometimes surgery isn't an option due to anesthetic risk, or an owner might want temporary control maybe for a breeding animal later, or they're just very worried about surgical side effects.
So what are the options for females?
Progestogen drugs, given by injection or tablets, can be used to postpone or suppress heat cycles in both bitches and queens.
But they come with warnings.
They do. You have to warn owners that the return to normal cycles after stopping can be unpredictable. And, more seriously, long-term progestogen use is linked to increased risks of pyometra diabetes and mammary tumors. They are definitely not without significant potential downsides.
So generally reserved for specific cases, not routine prevention.
Generally, yes. Surgery is usually preferred for permanent sterilization due to the lower long-term health risks compared to chronic progestogen use.
What about options for males? You mentioned Tardac earlier.
Right, delmetadenone acetate or Tardac.
Yeah.
It's a progestogen used sometimes as an adjunct treatment for things like benign prostatic hyperplasia or certain male behavioral issues.
But it doesn't sterilize them.
Correct. Crucially, it's not a sterilizing agent. It might reduce testosterone effects temporarily. The idea is if it works for the problem, say prostatic enlargement shrinks, then you can proceed with surgical castration knowing it's likely to be effective long-term for that issue.
A sort of therapeutic trial before permanent surgery.
Exactly. Then there's the dyslorelin implant and superlorin. That's quite different.
How does that one work?
It's a small implant placed under the skin. Dyslorelin is a GnRH agonist. It initially stimulates, then downregulates the pituitary, effectively switching off testosterone production and spermatogenesis.
So it does cause temporary infertility.
Yes, it provides temporary, reversible chemical castration. Effects last typically around 6 months, sometimes longer depending on the implant size, and it can be repeated.
Oh, I'd opt for that.
Owners who are undecided about surgery maybe want to see the effects of testosterone withdrawal first, or for specific situations where temporary infertility is needed. The main drawback currently is the cumulative cost if used long-term compared to a one-off surgery.
Okay, a reversible option. And finally, Nutersol, the injectable one.
Yes, intratesticular zinc gluconate, Nutersol. It's an FDA-approved chemical castration method for young male dogs, specifically between 3 and 10 months old.
How effective is it?
Studies showed high efficacy, around 99.6% in trials, for causing sterility. It works by causing sclerosis and atrophy within the testes.
And it's quicker than surgery.
The procedure itself is, yes, it's an injection directly into each testicle. Sedation is generally recommended for comfort and accuracy.
Does it affect testosterone?
That's the key difference compared to superlorin or surgery. Nutersol causes sterility, but doesn't significantly lower systemic testosterone. So those male behaviors might persist.
Interesting distinction. And it's only for dogs in that specific age range.
Correct. That's its current registration. And the dose is carefully calculated based on testicular width.
Right. So we've covered a lot of ground, the reasons for, the risks, the timing, surgical and chemical options. Bringing it all together, what's the bottom line for us as clinicians advising owners?
The absolute core principle has to be clear, thorough communication to get genuinely informed consent. Explain the pros, explain the cons, specifically for that animal in front of you.
Because owners come with different levels of knowledge.
Exactly. Most rely heavily on our guidance. We need to provide that balanced perspective. Acknowledge the risks, yes, but also put them into context. For the vast majority of pets, the benefits health, behavioral, population control really do outweigh those potential risks.
It's about tailoring the conversation.
Completely. Considering the breed, the age, health status, temperament, but also listening to the owner's situation, their concerns, their goals for their pet. It's a partnership in decision-making.
There's no single script that fits every consultation.
No way. It requires synthesizing all this information we've discussed and communicating it effectively, empathetically. It's about finding the best recommendation for that individual patient.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, perhaps the final thought for you, our listeners, is this. In this constantly evolving field with new research and options emerging, how can we best equip ourselves to keep refining both our knowledge and our communication skills?
How do we ensure we're always providing the most optimal care and the most informed guidance possible?
It really highlights the need for continuous learning and thoughtful practice in what is, after all, a cornerstone of what we do. Thanks for joining us today.